Hello. For those of you who haven't followed this series of interviews, my name's Philip Kramer. I'm one of the organisers of the Morpeth Book Festival, which is taking place in Morpeth on the 22nd and 23rd of March of this year. Today, I am both delighted and indeed honoured to have with me Sara Cockerill, who I'm going to talk to about her two books on the Queens of Medieval History. Sara is a senior and highly respected lawyer, but she's also a groundbreaking historian. And I say groundbreaking because I read Dan Jones, the author of the Plantagenets, writing for Waterstone's History Book of the Year, described Sara's book, Eleanor of Aquitaine, as the best biography of Eleanor ever written. So there have been many. This is the best in 900 years. And her first book, Eleanor of Castile, was described by Michael Prestwick, who's the Emeritus Professor of Durham, Emeritus Professor of History at Durham, and himself the author of the biography of Edward I, as the first full-length narrative biography of this particular Eleanor. Well, that's in 800 years. So that's why I say Sara is groundbreaking, and rather like buses, you wait a long time for a definitive biography of a medieval queen, and two come along. So Sara, hello. Thank you very much for joining us, and thank you again for agreeing to come up from the south of England to Morpeth to talk at the Morpeth Book Festival, and indeed to raise the profile of the festival. I think, Sara, you actually have got a connection, I think, with the northeast of England, don't you?
I do indeed. My late mother was basically from Gateshead, and my parents spent quite a lot of their retirement in Alnmouth. So I shall be using my trip to Morpeth also as an opportunity to get on the beach at Alnmouth and sort of say hello to her from there.
Well, it's certainly a very worthwhile activity, the beach, to walk along the beach at Alnmouth. And well, what I'd like to talk about with you is, firstly, just to talk about this question of medieval history, because really, you decided to, in your histories, concentrate on medieval history. And why was that?
It's a shamingly trad wife answer that I give you. I was a Tudor historian as far as my primary interests were, reflecting what I had learned at school. And when I got married, my husband was very, very keen on Edward I. And I thought it would be nice to have an overlap in our historical interests. And so I started reading some of Michael Prestwich's work. And in a footnote in one of his books about, I think it was actually in the Three Edwards, I found a footnote which suggested that Eleanor of Castile might not be the person that I had met in Jean Plady's historical novels when I was a kid, and might be rather more interesting. And the rest is history.
Yeah, well, that's presumably why you call her. Is that why you call her the Shadow Queen? Because she was just in the shadows until you shone some light on her.
Yeah, I mean, she was in the shadows in so many ways. There were a number of reasons why it was politically a good idea for the Queen of England to remain in the shadows at that precise point in medieval history. And medieval history, of course, you know, you've got this wonderful. It's quite a long period before you get to the Tudors, where you see a vast amount going on, and a vast amount also, I've discovered, in women's power, women's education, women's different experiences. You know, you start the early medieval period where women actually have quite an equal role in a number of ways, and then you swoop downwards gradually to where most of us come into history in school, 1485. By late medieval, early Tudor, women are firmly on the back foot.
Yeah, I was just wondering from that whether possibly culturally people might be better off if they didn't concentrate on 1485 and some.
Absolutely. I mean, you get some incredible women in early medieval history. People are always banging on about, you know, Eleanor of Aquitaine, she was such a shocker, she rebelled against her husband. Well, you know, William the Conqueror's wife basically provided arms and ammunition for one of their sons to rebel against William the Conqueror. You never hear about that. You know, in order to legitimize his rule, Henry I had to marry Edith Matilda, and she co-ruled with him. In Spain, the background that Eleanor of Castile comes from, you get these incredibly powerful women, including Urraca of Castile, Queen of the Spains, who basically went to war with her husband with her lover at her side. You know, great stories.
Well, they are. And well, we don't want to give everything away as to.
No, I'm staying firm, more or less firm.
To talk about, but it is striking, isn't it? The responsibility, not just the strength of these women, but the responsibility people were prepared to accept from them. And I was just wondering if partly this was due to this geographical spread, because when you look at medieval history, in a way, it seems in Europe certainly pretty international between the Frankish kings, Aquitaine, England, Germany, and so you could have a queen who was really a regent.
Yes, and you get, I mean, interestingly, in Provence, they practically had a matriarchal system for a while. So you get a paradigm down there. And throughout Europe, you get to a point where widows generally are seen as having more power, so long as they're not forcibly remarried, which of course is an occupational hazard for them. But by the time you've had your children and you are widowed, you get property and you are expected to run it. And so that was perfectly accepted, and that's a natural setup for a regent. So what you saw within middle and upper class society with women managing property, you then see reflected in regency. So it's not, you know, it's not that surprising that people accept it.
Yeah, but I think you also seem to recall in Eleanor of Castile reading that dower was dealt with in a different way, and that the wife got the dower at the beginning, didn't have to wait till the husband died in order to get control of the dower. Of course, that independence.
Yeah, so that's a sort of moving feast, and there's a clash of traditions between the Roman tradition and the sort of more northern European tradition, and that sort of the extent to which women get their property up front on marriage and run it. You have a sort of shifting sands across the 12th century. And in the 13th century, you get to the point where basically the tradition where women don't get their property until their husbands are dead becomes more dominant. And so you have a delayed power thing. But in Castile, where Eleanor of Castile came from, women were still getting an active dower on marriage. And that's one of the very interesting things which feeds into the way that she expected to live her life and did live her life.
Yeah, but I think perhaps that maybe the note upon which we could just introduce the main characters, because if you could just give us a thumbnail, again, not giving everything away, but a thumbnail of Eleanor of Castile first, and then Eleanor of Aquitaine.
Well, can I do it the other way around?
By all means, by all means.
Yeah, because of course Eleanor of Aquitaine is the queen that everybody knows. She is sometimes said to be the most famous woman in medieval history. She is the only woman ever to have been both Queen of France and Queen of England. She changed the balance of power within Europe with her marriage. She is referred to by Professor Nicholas Vincent as a walking title deed, because she inherited the whole of Aquitaine, which was vast. And she then marries successively Louis VII of France. And then when that marriage went really septic, Henry II, and it's quite a challenge, but that marriage went possibly even more septic over the years. She is famously, of course, mother of kings, because she is mother of Henry the Young King. She's mother of Richard the Lionheart. She's mother of King John. She's also the mother of some incredible queens and women who you hear a lot less about and who I'm probably going to talk about. So everybody knows about Eleanor of Aquitaine because she is queen of two countries, and when Richard the Lionheart goes off on crusade, she rules England for him, and she basically gets him out of prison and so on and so forth. Incredibly famous. Eleanor of Castile is the queen nobody knows. I called her Queen of Shadows because she lurks so resolutely in the shadows. The thing that you do know about her is, if you've ever seen the Eleanor crosses, and everybody has seen at least Charing Cross, which is not original, but is a copy of one of the 12 crosses, which was made to honor Eleanor of Castile. She was the very beloved first wife of Edward I, Hammer of the Scots, England's greatest medieval king. They married as children. They had a notoriously happy marriage, hence the 12 crosses. But there was a whole story out there about her waiting to be found. And when I found it, I have to say I was blown away by it.
So really you've written one biography of a queen about whom much was written, and I see in that particular book you seek to identify what's the truth and what's the myth. And the other, you write about a queen about whom nobody's really written. Yeah. And perhaps I could just, I always like to put this in when people talk about Edward I as the Hammer of the Scots, that this is seen north of the border, and even some people south of the border, as some terrible imposition on the Scots, which I can understand. But if you read what Richard of Hexham had to say about what the Scots were doing in Northumberland at the time, it's understandable why somebody needed to protect the interests of Northumberland, which was frankly being devastated by the Scots at the time. This was the whole populations being uprooted and killed. So anyway, that's just a word for those in Northumbria.
The place where I came in to Eleanor of Castile, right,
yes,
was this footnote in Michael Prestwich's book where he says, it's really interesting, actually, that Edward I had a really successful, harmonious, everybody praises it kind of reign until 1290. And then after that, which is the period where you think of him as Hammer of the Scots, and there are other things, it becomes a less successful reign. And he said, it's odd, that coincidence, because 1290 is the year that his wife died. And despite the fact that she did manage property successfully, nobody has ever suggested she had any influence on him. And I was astonished to find that anybody might ever have thought it, because I'd only met her through Jean Plaidy. But yes, so Edward from 1290 loses Eleanor, who was his sheet anchor, and he also loses 2 or 3 other really close friends. And so if there were some missteps in his treatment of the Scots, the loss of Eleanor, I think, is in part to blame.
And doubtless we'll be hearing more about this
Yes.
In due course. And I think you've been part of a move to reinstate some of the Eleanor crosses, is that right?
Well, not to reinstate them as such. The Hardingstone, that's the
Yes.
Northampton cross, had become very, very degraded and needed a lot of work doing to it. And so I joined with some local historians and sort of supporters of culture around Northampton to campaign to get that restored, which we did get done. And that is an enormous success. And I've been involved at the outskirts of some of the moves to get kind of memorials to replace the lost crosses.
I see, yeah. Well, I think that's about as much as we dare say about the two Eleanors without hearing more of your talk. And all I can say is thank you very much for talking to me about this subject. And we all look forward to seeing you in Morpeth fairly shortly, rather soon, actually.
Yes, I'm very much looking forward to it. On that occasion, Philip, I shall try to be as smart as you rather than rather scrubby as I am
Well,
this.
now that I'm retired, I'm rarely as smart as this, is the fact. But
Well, the late great Leonard Cohen always used to say that a man gets to the age where it's really a good idea to wear a suit, otherwise everybody thinks you're a tramp.
yeah, well, people might think that too readily about me, I guess. There we go. Okay, lovely seeing you, and I
You
look forward to
too.
seeing you up here.
Look forward to catching up soon.